dream of fights like this, but very seldom do they live up to the expectation. This is even more than you could dream of. Just imagine if you bought a ticket. Stop it, Frank. You can stop it anytime.
Hello and welcome to Dance Under Those Lights. Season's greetings to you all. I hope you've all had a great Christmas. We're now in that period between Christmas and New Year when we try and get over the overeating, the overdrinking, the overconsumption before we get ready to do it all again, New Year's Eve and New Year's. Thanks to everyone who's listened to the show, who's supported the show in 2025. It's almost 12 months since that first episode with Andy Clark. Had some great guests on here. I just love doing the show. I love talking boxing, and I'm very, very grateful to everyone who's supported the show. Some guests on here who have continued to support the show after they actually came on. It's amazing how many good people you get to meet on this journey, and today's episode is no different. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to say Julian McGowan is probably the best talker I've come across in the sport. I'll put it another way. I don't think anyone talks about boxing as well as Julian McGowan. He's best known for being the trainer of Gary Sykes, the former British super featherweight champion. He had about a 10-year period with Gary Sykes and was involved with him as an amateur before he took him all the way through to become two-time British champion. During that period of time, he supported and trained a lot of top fighters up in Yorkshire, became very, very well known in the sport, and then towards the end of Gary Sykes' career, Julian stepped away from the sport, handed back his license and focused on other pursuits, on business, on his family, whilst always continuing to be a huge fan of the sport. And as I say, for me, I've never come across anyone who talks as well about the sport. This show is a special one to finish 2025 with. I hope you enjoy it. There's so much to unpick. He's such an intelligent guy, and I think he's very, very much in demand. I think people in the sport know just what Julian's qualities are, both as a coach and a mentor to fighters, but also as a commentator on the sport. I want to give a quick shout out to Bob on Canada's Boxing Channel. Without Big Bob, I wouldn't have been able to get in touch with Julian, because it was via his show that I first listened to Julian a few months ago, and I've been trying to get him on the show ever since, and I'm very, very grateful to be able to bring this show to you today. I hope you all enjoy it. I hope you all have a great new year, and wishing you all a very prosperous 2026. Keep listening. We're going to have some more great guests on the show, and once again, thank you to everyone. I'll leave you with Julian McGowan.
Julian, welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
I'm very good. It's been an exhausting week, and I'm just ready for a little bit of calm now, as you know.
It sounds like you had a big night in the family last night. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So my son does mixed martial arts. He's been training for just over 2 years. He broke my heart when he told me he was going to go the MMA route, and of course not the boxing, as everybody would expect.
Yeah.
And he's been training phenomenally. He's been doing interclubs and getting his base level. I've continued to do his hands. I've then started becoming an official coach at the gym where he trains, Powerhouse in Ossett.
Yeah.
And we've been working massively hard. And last night he had his MMA debut on it's a really fantastic professionally run organisation, the BMF show at Barnsley Metrodome. He came up against an older lad who was very, very good from an elite gym. My son came up just short. He lost on points in what was a back and forth fight. It was hard to be involved in. Massively proud of him. He's come out a few lumps and bumps and a cauliflower ear, what's worse than it was last week.
Yeah.
This comes with the sport. He thinks he's broken his thumb, so he's a bit battered and a bit bruised, but he's buzzing. He loved it. The whole family's incredibly proud of him. It was a tight fight, and he showed his steel, and that's all you can ever ask.
Sounds like he did fantastically well. So well done, Joe. And we look forward to hearing more about what's next, because it sounds like he's set the bar fairly high in terms of the expectations with such a good performance on his debut, right?
Yeah, the feedback from the organisers and the promoters, BMF, because like I say, everybody wants to get on the BMF show. It's like a big thing. It's streamed. It's a pay-per-view.
Right.
You get talented fighters on there. There was about 30 fights last night. So you're lucky to just be on those shows. And the organisers just said afterwards, and the pros were coming up to Joe and myself and James, his head coach, and they were just saying, that was unbelievable. And even his opponent, who was a really nice young man called Zane Scott from St. Helens, his coach came up to us afterwards and he just said, "We were not expecting that." He says, "My lad really is a precocious fighter. He trains with IMAF world champions in the gym and he holds his own with those guys." He says, "We were not expecting any kind of resistance, no offense,
Yeah, yeah.
from his son." He says, "We thought that would be a quick fight for us." And his opponent said the same thing to us. And I says, "But wow, your son's unbelievable." And it's a tough introduction for both of them into MMA. And there was a really lovely moment after the fight. So my son's been craving donuts, Krispy Kreme donuts, I think they're called. His partner had bought him some before the fight. And then after the fight, he had this big box of Krispy Kreme donuts. And I went into the changing room and he was sat with his opponent. They'd just been battering each other for 9 minutes. He'd given his opponent a donut and they both sat there just chatting away like nothing had happened, eating plenty of sugar. And I'm like, you'd only ever get that in combat sports, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, absolutely. The respect between two warriors and knocking lumps out of each other and then best buddies afterwards. That's the type of story we're here for.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. What a great story. Well, looking forward to following what's next for young Joe. So, great stuff. Really, really pleased to have you on the show, Julian. Really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to dive straight into a warm-up and ask you to start off with a bit of a segue maybe from that last point, actually. Your son, Joe, at a fairly young age, walks into a boxing gym. Who in history is the ideal cornerman for you to entrust your son's well-being, development as a young boxer with? Who would you choose out the entire history of boxing to be put in that position of responsibility?
It's a great question because you'll know yourself in coaching, and I'm not really to be dismissive. There are a lot of coaches who are not the greatest coaches. People sometimes find their way into sports.
Yeah.
And then you've got the brilliant amateur coaches who are completely underappreciated. I think someone like a Tony Burns, some of those legends really from those gyms. I would say the obvious one, being from Yorkshire, I would say Brendan Ingle. But I mean, he was a genius. But I think the thing with Brendan Ingle was he didn't just make excellent fighters. People always debate Brendan Ingle, but he made characters. He made young men confident. And I always remember the story about if you went to Brendan Ingle's gym, for example, what he would do was he would have you singing in the ring somewhere over the rainbow. And if you could sing in front of people, then you could probably get into a ring and fight in front of people. And he used to build confidence. Tony Burns, of course, was a legend. I mean, I could say one of my hero, for example, was Eddie Futch. Eddie Futch was just like a teacher of boxing, very much like the Emmanuel Stewart mold. But if my son was walking into the boxing gym for the first time, you wouldn't want him to be with a seasoned professional coach, because it's about the basics and it's about the fundamentals and the groundings. And you have to look at those coaches, the underappreciated coaches who would give him those fundamentals and giving him his confidence. And I just think, someone like Burns and, maybe even Brendan Ingle. I just know so many good amateur coaches. It's hard to remember them all because there are so many who are just underappreciated. I mean, a good friend of mine, massively underrated, is Steve Mailer, who was a trainer of Terry Flanagan. Now, Steve was a good amateur coach, young, hungry for knowledge, and he's underappreciated. Just anybody of that mold, really, but somebody who's just not. You don't want big egos. Egos are not great for kids. Somebody who can understand children, somebody who can understand different personality types. So several trainers I would be happy for my son, including myself, of course.
Great answer, Julian. So, I mean, this is the third consecutive podcast that Eddie Futch's name has been mentioned. Now, appreciate you that wasn't your ultimate answer, but the last two podcasts we've had Wayne McCulloch, who went to train with him, and spoke so highly of him as a human being, more than a boxing man, and that for me is the heart of coaching in the first place. Anyway, is the ability to communicate with other human beings, and you go from there. And then Mark Collins, Mark touched on other. He's a London-based guy, or originally London-based, and so he also talked about Mickey May at West Ham and
yeah.
Tony Burns at Repton. Obviously, Mick Carney at the Lodge comes up time and time again as well. But I think your point around there are so many amateur coaches out there doing incredible work. Not just launching the careers of successful boxers, but launching the lives of young people, and giving them a foundation. And it's amazing to shine a light on those people, even if we don't necessarily have the names to be able to project them and put them on a pedestal.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so many good people I've come across in boxing, and that's what I always try and think of now. You sometimes go down on the road of being dismissive, and there are charlatans in any walk of life, but I always think of positive ones and just the people who have change lives. And you look at, like I said, the Burnses and guys like that, their records speak for themselves. Yet people can have the numbers game. They say, well, listen, you get the numbers through the door, you're bound to have some national champions just on pure talent alone. And I understand that. But for me, it's the coaches who get someone who's raw, who's shy, who's not ready at all, and not too left feet. You have to have some element of dexterity and ability to box. So there's some kids who could never box.
Yeah.
I do always think of the story. I mentioned Brendan Ingle earlier, but I think of the story of him and Johnny Nelson. Johnny Nelson was something like 3-10 as an amateur.
Yeah.
And then he went professional, and he lost some of his first fights as a pro. And if you look at the job that style, which obviously would have been great for Johnny Nelson, but the road that they went down for Johnny Nelson to be one of our longest reigning world champions, how good a coach to get somebody who can't even win an amateur fight to go on, earn good money, and become a long reigning world champion. That's incredible.
That's coaching and teaching, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We'll come back to this later on in the show, but what an important point and what a great example that is that perhaps people don't always look to. Yeah, we're just a fantastic example. Okay, second question. Rather than ask you who your favourite fighter is of all time, I want to ask you what your favourite streak is of all time, because often fighters are judged on their overall career and their overall body of work, but there's a lot of great fighters, and there'll still be some of them, they're likely to be a name that everyone's familiar with. But can you remember a run of fights, let's say 4, 5, 6 fights, when a fighter was at absolutely the top of their performance levels, and they maintained them better during that period of time, that fixed period of time, than you can remember anyone else doing so during your life in boxing or your...
It's another great question. I'll give you two just as a very instinctive answer. Obviously, I wasn't aware of the question, but that's the fun of this, isn't it? We pull from what we know. So I've always had a preference to the lighter weight fighters. I think of from the super featherweights to the middleweights. Those are the fighters I like to think of. So I'll give you a domestic answer, but before I give you the domestic answer, I'm going to give you the international answer.
Brilliant.
A fighter absolutely loved. And this is a fighter who generally is just disregarded now because he didn't quite make the all-time great status, because the career was meteoric and then it went off. So if I think of Donald the Cobra Curry.
Yeah.
I mean, it was something like 304 as an amateur. He would have won the Olympic gold medal in Moscow in 1980, but of course the US boycotted.
Yeah.
He was a red-hot favourite to win the gold medal, which would have also given a different perspective on Donald Curry and how he turned pro. But he went on a run from when he won the welterweight championship, and then he defended it against guys like Marlon Stallone. 3 or 4 really just fantastic fights, but back to back. He came to Manchester and beat Colin Jones, and Colin Jones was a seriously hard-punching, welterweight who had been very unlucky in a draw and a split decision loss to Milt McCrory the year before. And I remember watching Donald Curry just surgically just take him to pieces in 4 rounds. He cut him up, he beat him up, thinking that's the best example I've ever seen of inside fighting and being defensively minded at the same time. He had the precision of a surgeon, and he was incredible. And then he had another knockout defense. And then he fought Milton McCrory in a unification. And Milton McCrory was just absolutely a fantastic unbeaten world champion himself. It was a WBC world champion.
Yeah.
It was a unification. And if anyone's never seen Donald Curry against Milton McCrory, it's one of the most chilling performances you will ever see in your life. It's a 2-round demolition. To wipe out a world champion, an unbeaten world champion in such fashion, was frightening. But Donald Curry from 1984, 1986, he was the heir apparent. People were talking about him fighting Marvin Hagler.
Yeah.
One Point KO magazine had him as a number one pound for pound fighter in the world, above Marvin Hagler, which says, if you look at the pound for pound fighters in 1984, and you look at the fighters that we had from Aaron Pryor to Alexis Arguello, Azuma Nelson, Larry Holmes, Mike Spinks, we had just the cream of boxing in 1984. And Donald Curry was, in 1985, the number one pound for pound ranked fighter. He blitzed through McCrory, and then as a perfect link up, it all went wrong in Atlantic City in 1986 when he was beaten by London, or England's own Lloyd Honeyghan, in a massive upset. And Lloyd Honeyghan, again, then he went on a run himself. He wiped out Johnny Bumphus, who was a really highly decorated fighter and a former light welterweight champion. He wiped him out. So he beat Donald Curry in 6 rounds. He made the best fighter in boxing quit. He then stopped Johnny Bumphus in 2 rounds and just wiped him out like he wasn't even there. He stopped Gene Hatcher, again a former light welterweight champion of the world. He beat Maurice Blocker, who was again just a brilliant, brilliant fighter. And then he just went off the boil. Then he lost to Vaca, he lost to Stalin, and he was never the same fighter again. Donald Curry, so you had 2 reigns there. You'd got Donald Curry from 1984 to 1986, and then the torch got ripped off him by Lloyd Honeyghan, who went from 1986 to about 1988.
Yeah.
And you had 2 dominant welterweights with 7 or 8 defenses against high-level opposition. So dominant. It just sticks in my mind always. And but equally, Donald Curry just went completely. He was never the same fighter again.
Yeah.
He won a version of a middleweight title off Rennie Jacob. It was not the same fighter. McCallum ironed him out as well. And then Lloyd Honeyghan just went. I don't know if it was the money or the weight making, or there's just something happens when
There was a distraction there, wasn't there?
there was a distraction, and Honeyghan just went, and he was never the same really after probably the Maurice Blocker or Hatcher fight. And it was like, what's happening to these guys? But those were short reigns. And of course, you could pick out Marvin Hagler and the back-to-back wins that Hagler had. But for me, it was Donald Curry. I don't remember technically a better fighter from 1984 to 1986 than Donald Curry. I try to remember, that was my era, because that was when I was a young aspiring amateur boxer, or wanted to box at that time. And I don't remember a better technical fighter than Donald Curry. He was unbelievable.
Brilliant. What a great answer. If I gave out a prize for answers to this question, that's the best one so far. I'm going to adapt this final question, partly because of what you've already said. I usually ask what your favourite era or decade was in the sport. You're not allowed to say the 1980s. So apart from the 1980s, what's your favourite era or decade in the sport? It doesn't have to be a perfect decade. It can be, crossover or whatever.
It's a difficult question. I can't answer with the 70s because I was young. I've watched the 70s retrospectively. I remember some of the fights as a 7-8-year-old because my parents, it was a boxing household. They loved the fights. And I remember watching, some of the Matthew Saad Mohammeds and John Conti. I remember watching those fights, but retrospectively, the 70s I adore, and I'm still catch up on fights from the 70s even now.
Yeah. Those light heavyweights, Dwight Mahawakawi and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Just unbelievable. Yeah. Love that era. But the 90s was incredible. Of course, Tyson was sort of, 86 to 90, and then he got beat by Buster Douglas. But the 90s, when we'd got, Trinidad and fighters like that, the 90s was a good era. And perhaps the last era in boxing before things became very, very political and fighters just started avoiding each other. So I was even though I'm not a massive on the heavyweights, I was a big Lennox Lewis fan. I love how Lennox was a bright guy. He called it chess with violence boxing, and he was a fantastic fighter. I used to love watching him. And of course, we had the middleweights and the super middleweights were very, very rich in the 90s. But the 90s was a golden era as well for me. Big fan of Pernell Whitaker. So Whitaker obviously turned over in 84, but he still had some big marquee fights in the 90s.
Yeah.
And that was just such a great era. And then we entered the 2000s, and it just seemed to dip somewhat, which is ironically when I got my professional license, that's when I entered into professional boxing. but the era started to just dip a little bit for me, and certainly a lack of excitement in the heavyweights with the Klitschko's. I'm not being disrespectful, by the way,
No, no, no.
phenomenal.
But I think that's an understandable comment to make. Now, I think a lot of
It
people.
was just the sexiness of boxing lost something.
Yeah.
Although now the fights we're getting, even though, domestically and locally boxing might not be thriving, we are getting those fights again. So it's reignited my interest in boxing by getting the fights that we demand. But I would say retrospectively the 70s, but that's cheating. But the 90s was a really, really good decade for me, and I remember some fantastic fights. And I think De La Hoya turned over. If I might be wrong on the date, but De La Hoya turned over in the early 90s. Was it Barcelona
92,
92?
he won gold and then he turned over.
So someone might correct me. So De La Hoya, I used to love watching him. I thought he was phenomenal. I remember watching him win the Olympic gold, and it was just an era with De La Hoya and Ike Quarty and Trinidad and Vargas and those guys.
Yeah.
It was a very special era.
And no mention of Roy Jones Jr. in there either.
I have to be careful with Jones Jr. I have mixed views on him. Phenomenal talent. He was an absolute phenomenal talent. I always frown on a career when someone tests positive for a banned substance. I can't help it. It won't be a popular answer. I'll get hammered in the comments.
I could completely understand that. I think it kind of. I know other people in the sport who feel exactly the same and make the same observation on this topic.
Yeah. Brilliant fighter. I mean, when he got robbed in Seoul, it was horrific. I remember him turning over, and I think at the time, I'm gonna show my age now. I think it was B Sky B. I think it was like when Sky Broadcasters. I think there was a hybrid broadcasting channel at the time, and I remember watching some of his early fights then.
Yeah,
and it was brilliant. Jones Jr. was absolutely brilliant. The way he just beat Bernard Hopkins, to win the vacant belt, and then what he did to James Toney, he shut him down, and his speed was blinding. I won't go into it. I just felt the way that he went up to heavyweight. He did pick off the weakest champion, which is fine. And it was also part of the belt hopping, which I never love.
Yeah.
I've never loved the belt hopping, picking an easy belt at a title and then dropping back down. But the way he bulked up for Ruiz, and then he was never the same fighter after. But of course, after Richard Hall, he tested positive, and it just, to me, it puts a stain on a great fighter, and that's just how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think just a comment from me on that. My understanding, and my understanding is not born up from the same experience as yours, but I believe that there's so much doping in the sport, and the cycling is managed away from observation of the people who matter. It's hard to make the distinction, and my suspicion, sadly, is that there are far too many names that we might mention because they've never been caught that would fall into that category, and therefore it makes the whole discussion very difficult to make the distinction, because you could have someone who maybe got caught who wasn't as guilty, for want of a better expression, as others who have never been caught but have been doping for a long, long period of time, or are very smart at it, or whatever. It's such a difficult subject, and it's one that I regret a great deal. Not that I have anything to regret about it, but it is a stain on the sport.
It is, and even though I'm to some extent a fan of Canelo Alvarez, I love watching him train and watching him fight. It was well beaten by Crawford. That was a phenomenal performance, but I can't ever. I love watching Alvarez, but I can't love, because of the stain on his career. But I do always respect the fact that he did the hair follicle test, which very, very few fighters will do after. He signed up to the 24/7 terms and conditions of VADA. So he did things to prove his innocence. And I always think I don't want to be a hypocrite, but I kind of half give him a pass.
There's more to it than just, you fail or you don't fail at the end of the day, isn't it?
There certainly is. And for me, whenever a fighter, who's tested positive submits a hair follicle, it's 100% conclusive. They can prove if there's long-term performance-enhancing drugs just by doing a hair follicle test. They can unequivocally prove that. And Canelo Alvarez did the test, and it showed no use. So
I get your point.
Yeah, but he did take the ban for 6 months. So I'm like,
Great stuff. Fantastic warm-up. Very thorough, as expected. And that sets us up nicely to go into the main course. My first question is, how has boxing changed during your time in the sport?
Boxing's changed significantly. I mean, the art of boxing is the art of boxing. Stylistically, it has evolved. We only have to look at footage from the 40s, 50s, and 60s to see, other than the exception and the precocious fighters who were always ahead of the time, like a Willie Pep, for example, the style of boxing has evolved. I've seen many, many changes. One of the changes I saw was the way that amateur boxers, you could argue this is a good thing. I'm just going to give some observations. Was the sort of mentality and the approach around amateur boxers. So what I mean by that is I was an amateur in 1986. That's when I had my first amateur fight. I was pretty honest. I was an average amateur, and I was a young coach in 94. I think I did my level 1, 94, 95. I was a young coach. But when I was an amateur boxer, I'll give you an example. When we used to be fit all season, so you have your holiday, you'd come back into the gym in late August,
Yeah.
you'd get fit for season. Our trainer, Mark Tate, says you're fit to go early September, and then right until the end, unless you're in the championships, you'll go right through to May to June. It's seasonal, and you're fit to fight all the time, and you train every night. It was as simple as that. We didn't know really much about S&C. We didn't know much about nutrition and diet in the 80s. So there's positive changes, which I'll come on to there. But the biggest change I've seen is cultural, and I'll give you a contrast. So when I was a young amateur boxer, you went to the gym on Monday and they had a big whiteboard. And on that whiteboard, it would just say, McGowan, Wednesday, Newcastle. That was it. You were boxing in Newcastle on Wednesday. There was no debate.
Yeah.
No conversation. You were fit to train all year. Unless you had a real reason you couldn't fight, you were prepared to box, often at short notice. We might get a week's notice. You get more notice if it was a home show. But generally,
Yeah.
the whiteboard would say, Atkinson next week in Sunderland, McGowan, you're there. And you were boxing. There was no conversation, no debate. So that was 1986, 1987, when I had a busy first season, 8 amateur fights. Culturally, we had nothing. So we went into the gym. This is not the violin, by the way. This is just as it was for everybody.
Yeah.
Our boxing gym, the way we trained was backwards way around. We turned up, we went on a run around the park. It was to get rid of us. So the pros who were training, the 2 porta cabins, with a bottom porta cabin, top porta cabin with some stairs connecting them. The pros would come earlier. They'd got priority of the bags, the ring, which was not even a ring. It was just a carpet with some ropes around it. It was terrible. They get the priority. We go on a run. We get flogged. And you know this, you listen to this now, you'd be like, well, this is the backwards way around. We'd then get flogged on the circuit work. You'd go up, and if you could find some bag gloves that matched, you were lucky. If you could find some bag gloves with padding, you were lucky. We didn't wear head guards. And then you would hit a bag, no timer. We had no ring timer. Someone would just shout time if they could remember, or it was like that. And then you'd train for about an hour and a half, and you get your name shouted out, get your sparring gloves on. So it was bag mitts, it was sparring mitts. And then you'd spar. There might be 6 of us in the ring, 2 of us in the ring. I might spar a kid who's 8 stone, who's an open class boxer. I might spar a pro. I might spar a novice heavyweight. You just sparred, and that was it. Until the coach said, right, how many have you done, McGowan? Oh, I've done 7. Right, you're done. And that was it. 5 days a week, Sunday morning, that was the routine. And then I'm going to fast forward.
But just very quickly, any teaching involved, or just all practice?
Do you want me to be completely honest? And I don't want to. So both my late coaches, Mark Tate and Keith Tate, passed away. Mark Tate was he was not much older than me. He was a young lad who was thrust into the amateur coaching as a young guy in his 20s. Very, very, very little teaching. Keith Tate was a good coach and good teacher when he had the time. With the lads he had the time for. But this is the 1986 when amateur boxing was all the rugby or boxing. That's all there were for young lads.
Yeah.
That's all they were. And we probably had 50 or 60 carded boxers at any point with a stretched coaching staff. Ian Dawson might have been there in the early days. Mark Tate was running around. Very, very little coaching. Like I say, it was the backwards way around. Didn't know anything about nutrition, didn't know anything about diet. You just trained hard and you weighed what you weighed. That was the philosophy of the gym. And most gyms, by the way. In terms of structured coaching, breaking down punches and breaking down moves, very, very little. Tate was a very knowledgeable man. If I got 5 minutes of Keith Tate once a month just showing me something, I never forgot that because it was gold. It was gold. But you didn't get the time. You didn't get the time because I was one of 7 or 8 or 9 carded fighters at that time, at that weight. So there'd be like 7 or 9, 10 stoners, 10.5 stoners, and it'd be the lads who were in the championships, the open class kids who got the time.
Yeah.
And that was how it was. I don't look back and say I wasn't really loved and I wasn't really coached and feel bitter about that. I understood how it was. I understood it was a young man who was training as Mark. He did the best he could. He produced lots of national champions, so his methods worked. But in terms of teaching, very, very little teaching. And again, I'm just saying it as it was. That's because there was so many of us, and there was the pros training there as well. There shouldn't have been, but the pros used to train there. Some good level fighters, central area level fighters, might be English title level in this day and age. And we were flogged and we trained hard every single night. And then we boxed when we were told to box. So if I fast forward from 1986, 87, 88, when that was the gym culture, I went back into, I was an amateur coach then from 96 to 2000. And then I went back into the amateurs I'm going to say time goes so quickly. I'm going to say about 7 or 8 years ago, I got asked to coach a young man who was having a few problems. And I went back into the amateurs for 2 seasons. Now then, the culture of the change was massive. First of all, I started hearing this word camp. We'd got about 15 or 16 carded boxers at that gym. It was it was rival bags. I've never seen facilities like it ever. And that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. Those kids had everything. They all had their own bespoke training kits and apparel, 400 quid shorts here and, fly gloves and winning gloves. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't remember having this.
It's been knockout winning gloves, surely.
These kids had it all,
Really?
and they had all the equipment. They had it all. The coach was a good coach. We got on, and I left the gym, went back into the pros. But culturally, what I saw was boxers or parents of boxers in that gym. My son can't spar tonight. He's a bit tired. He's had some exams today. And then I started hearing the word for the first time ever in an amateur gym. And I'd been obviously 20 years had passed since I'd been coaching amateurs. I started hearing the word camp. And there was some young lads one night chatting, and one of the young amateurs whose name I won't mention, got offered a fight, and the coach was almost trying to convince him to take this fight. And he says, we can get you ready in 3 weeks. So this is the biggest change I saw. And I was thinking, just hold your tongue for a minute, try and understand what's going on, because I was there training. I got asked to train a select amount of few kids. I was fortunate. I got the cream of the kids and the lads I got asked to work with, because when you got to a situation like myself and not being arrogant, I always decided who I'd worked with. I get offers now. Every single night I got messages and texts and emails, people asking me if I'll coach. I'm not being arrogant. That's just the way it is. I don't do it now. I just work with my son and I work with his kids. But I got asked to train at that gym, so I had some caveats. So those kids I didn't work with, I was listening to this conversation one night, and the coach was saying, what do you think 3 weeks? What do you think to this amateur? And he's like, I don't think I can fight in 3 weeks. I don't feel ready. And I interrupted and I says, hang on a minute, can I get this right? And I told this group of amateurs the story I've just told you about the whiteboard. We didn't have gloves that matched. We got told what to do. And our name was on a board. And I said, if you're boxing on Wednesday, McGowan, you're boxing. And if you're not fit and you're not boxing, find another gym. And they were so mollycoddled. These amateurs were so, I'm not saying all amateurs are mollycoddled, by the way. I'm making drawing a line there. But these amateurs were mollycoddled. They were saying it's a camp. I need 8 weeks to box as an amateur. I'm going to tell you when I'm sparring. I can only do 4 rounds tonight because I feel a little bit tired. Unbelievable. So culturally, boxing, the act of boxing and sparring's hard. Sparring's hard, whether it's the 40s or it's today, sparring's hard. I was just shaking my head and I'm thinking, why are we mollycoddling fighters? And it certainly didn't happen to me, and it certainly didn't happen in my day. And we have fighters who were 14, 15-year-olds telling the coach that they couldn't spar that night or they felt a bit tired or they wouldn't be ready to fight in 3 weeks in peak season. And I'm thinking, I make no wonder we get these divas that we get now in the gym. Unbelievable. So that, for me, culturally, that one of the biggest changes was, and I'm not talking about some of the tough areas in the inner city. I'm not naive to this stuff. I'm not insulting the intelligence of some of these tough gyms in Liverpool where people still have nothing. But the biggest cultural thing was the equipment that young amateurs had. I'm talking 2-3 bout amateurs. The equipment, the way that the training was structured, the way that they weren't fighting 10, 15 times in a season. They were just fighting 3-4 times in a season. They were telling coaches what to do. Not saying that's every single gym, but I was just staggered by that. And I thought, no, this isn't something that I can really sign off on. I'm not talking about just tough love and making kids do what they're told, but just how fortunate fighters are now. And of course, then you've got fighters and parents watching videos because it's all out there now, isn't it? They're watching videos of the kids that their son or their daughter might be fighting, and then making calls saying, "No, I don't want my son to fight that person. I've watched them; they're really good." And parents getting more involved as well. That maybe it was that gym, but parents were getting heavily involved in fighters' careers. And I'm thinking, just young amateurs. It was ludicrous.
Yeah.
So I'm not rubbishing people. I'm just saying the biggest difference was culturally, and that for me was, so that in terms of the amateur scene and in terms of boxers, that was the biggest difference.
So what's
But
your opinion? What's your view on the impact of that then? So what's the consequences of that situation you just
Well, one of the things you learn, boxing's a dangerous sport. There are so many things now that are better. We sparred every night without head guards. That was it. Hard sparring. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing. We know now with trauma and injuries, that is not a good thing. But what happens is, this is probably why a lot of working class kids come through the ranks and win titles and do well. What happens is you can become entitled. So culturally, you can become entitled if you get everything your own way. Now, ultimately, boxing is like life, but boxing it's about adversity. In boxing, life's not going to go your way. The fight's not always going to go your way. It's going to be hard. If you're used to controlling every aspect of your training or having a say in your training and who you're going to fight, and this does happen with amateurs in other gyms, I hear this all the time. If you start being picky, you get used to things going your own way. And then when you do get adversity, you'll really struggle.
Yeah.
So culturally, I'm not sure it's always a good thing. I'm not talking about mollycoddling people because, as I've said, when you fight, it's hard. Your son fights at a good level. It's hard. Boxing's hard, whether it's now or whether it's 100 years ago. But there's something about having nothing, and there's something about adversity that really makes you tougher and more resilient.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, and this is a topic I didn't think we'd be going down this road, but let's just stay here for a minute. There's a guy I know in the sport, very, very good guy, very experienced guy, who I would have thought would have said to me that privileged kids make soft boxers, and he doesn't believe that. He believes that actually there's no one, obviously one size fits all, but
Of course, yeah.
as a trainer, you've probably got a better chance these days of bringing through a privileged kid who has less complications in their life,
Yeah.
and can focus on the sport and on the discipline, and potentially has the resources behind him to be able to do that. And I think a lot of what you've just explained there is a very sad reflection on the fact that I think there's an awful lot of underprivileged kids who don't even get the access to sports that used to be the domain of working class and relatively poverty-stricken families. And I wonder how much talent doesn't even get to walk in the gym in the first day, or at least stay there beyond being asked for 50p subs or £2 subs or shape or whatever it is. And it's the same in football as well. Football has become such a middle-class sport now that I do wonder how can families afford to spend 40, 50, 60 quid a month on a sport when they can't put food on the table?
You've just said it exactly that. So, my son trains at a brilliant gym. His head coach at that gym is fantastic, but it's not cheap. Nothing's cheap nowadays. Now, Keith Tate, the one thing I will say about Keith Tate, because I don't want to go into the details, but Keith Tate and I had a couple of moments where we didn't really speak for various reasons. But He had a phenomenal boxing brain. He was proven. Really, as an amateur, he beat Ken Buchanan. He was a multinational champion himself. He was a decent pro, but as an amateur, he was phenomenal. But Keith Tate had a principle. Your subs were £1 a week. Half of those kids didn't pay subs, and he knew that. They had nothing. That's why we didn't have our own gloves. I'm talking about what the difference we're seeing now. Britain, and certainly where I live now. So I'm from a town called Dewsbury. So I lived there for 44, 45 years. I've now lived into a slightly nicer area, about 5-6 miles away from Dewsbury. But Britain's in the bottom, Dewsbury in the bottom 10%. It's a poor town, very, very poor town. Poverty is high, unemployment is high, crime is high. Dewsbury is a very tough town. Your average boxing gym now is between £40 and £50 a month to train. You have to have your own equipment. They don't have communal gloves, most gyms now. Who's got 40, 50 quid a month to pay for boxing? My son's like your son. We pay his subs. He's got all the best gear. He's got a ex-professional boxing coach doing his strength conditioning and his boxing side. His own coach is phenomenal. All the lads he trains with are phenomenal. He showed he's got mettle. He hasn't been dragged up. He's had a very good upbringing. But where are the working class kids? Where are the hungry kids, the ones who were dragged up from the street, who have got that hunger? And I don't know if we're seeing that as much now. I'm not saying we don't see it at all, but who's got £50 a month? If you're a single parent, like a lot of children are in these tough areas, your mum's struggling to survive. She might have her own issues. Where's 40, 50 quid coming from?
It's not. I mean, if they can't afford a tin of beans to feed a couple of kids, what about to pay even 20 quid a month, let alone 40, 50?
Times are very hard now, Kevin. They are very, very hard. We're seeing it now, aren't we? We're seeing the breakdown in the family. We're seeing lots of people struggling with mental health and addiction. We're seeing, if we're honest, children fending for themselves and unwanted children. And I know my son went to a tough school, and I won't mention this person's name. And I live in a nice house, but it's just a 4-bed house. It's nothing special, but I live in a nice detached house. And my son's had a couple of his friends come here, and it broke my heart. One of them came in one day and he went, "Wow, this is a mansion." I was heartbroken, mate. I was heartbroken. And then you find out more about these kids. Some kids have got no chance. And sport used to be an avenue for kids.
Their chance, their light in their life. And I'm always thinking about the talent drain. I'm always thinking about where is, we talked with John Scully on this show about the amount of boxers that were just in the state of New York back 50 years ago was more than what you've got in the whole of the US territory now. The whole of the US territory, all 50 states or whatever it is.
Doesn't surprise me at all. Like I said, that the gym where my son trains, his coach is having to make a living from it. He's a modest living himself. He has to charge a certain amount. The rent's high. You've got facilities. It costs a lot of money. There's no funding for this gym. This guy's doing it all himself. He's done a brilliant job, but he has to have a certain barrier, a certain entry point for what he charges. And unless there's scholarships for young kids now, they're going to schools and they identify kids who are great footballers, great boxers, potentially, because they do boxing schools a lot now just as fitness. Who's giving these kids a chance? And, my son and his friends, I'm not saying they're all rich, because they're not, but they're doing okay.
Yeah.
You see the parents drop them off on a night. They're all well turned out. They've all got good equipment. And they're all as hard as nails, by the way, and they're all tremendous athletes and really fine young people with great values. But I'm not seeing in all these gyms now, and that's what I stopped seeing, these kids who were struggling. I'm not saying that's not the case. My caveat is I keep saying that will happen. There will be circumstances where there are kids who are in the boxing gyms and maybe there's some nice coaches who are letting them train free or helping them. But it's like some of the brightest children at school will never achieve academically because of the carnage that's going on at home. Whereas, you're like myself, very fortunate our kids are achieving because they're lucky, because they haven't got
Which,
This house isn't getting smashed up on a night. They're not strangers coming in here, drinking and carrying on, and they're not the police at the door every night. My kids wouldn't know what to do
yeah,
if there was ever any kind of confrontation at this house. They're very fortunate, but there's a real social divide. I know it's a different conversation, but there is a real social divide, and we're no longer seeing the success story. We see them, but we don't see as many as we used to.
no, I agree.
It was combat sports was a working class sport. It was fundamentally working class,
Absolutely.
and the exception to the rule, the Ray Leonard and Ali's, they weren't spoiled, but they weren't in poverty. They're the exception to the rule. Everybody was working class, whereas now, no, middle
No,
class kids coming through.
and I think that might ever actually reflect on the amount that performances and the quality of boxers, let's say in the 40s, 50s, 60s, have progressed to where they are now. They might have progressed, but they might have progressed 5, 10, 15%, whereas team sports, let's say, for example, the 200% better, the performances of the current day Bayern Munich side compared to the Bayern Munich side of the 1950s. The
Absolutely.
aggregate of a number of different factors, but boxing doesn't benefit from that as much, partly for the reasons we've said, I think.
Yeah, it's sad. It's a sad indictment, and I don't know what we do. There are good coaches, as I said. There are people who let people train, but there are few and far between,
Yeah,
and
yeah, but
it's a tough one. Where's the money? Where's the funding?
absolutely, absolutely. Let's move on to the development of young fighters. So you're without a doubt, I guess, our most successful period as a professional boxing coach was with Gary Sykes, who had a phenomenal career, brilliant list of opponents on, brilliant, great amateur career as well. Fantastic
Yeah.
professional, the likes of Anthony Crolla, Terry Flanagan, Gary Buckland, and many, many more. It was a real kind of marquee career during that period of British boxing. You have been on a journey with him, but also I think if you aggregate all the things that you've done in your career as a trainer, both as an amateur and as a professional trainer, I want to ask you a little bit about how a kid walks into a gym and starts off as a beginner and then moves to become a novice. And then perhaps has the ups and downs, it's not a straight line, but then after a period of time, they get ready to go and complete open class. And then if they have some success and that you're whittling out here, there's less and less as you go up along the journey, but maybe they start to get to elite, national and national level. And then finally, professional. All of those stages require recognition of development, recognition of things, both psychologically, physically, technically, all these things. Tell me a little bit about what you look for to move fighters through, what you look for both to move them through, but to prepare them for it.
It's a great question because, even when I was a young amateur, you get fighters who walk in the gym who are really precocious already.
Yeah.
They just take to it so easily. So the best thing I can remember was when I was in the gym. I'd been in the gym maybe 2 years, and James Eyre started boxing. James Eyre was a phenomenal amateur, and he was a really, really good professional fighter.
Yeah.
And he'd been in the gym 1 or 2 weeks. So he's already doing things what some of those fighters have not been, who's been there for 12 months. So first of all, whilst everything's incremental and you can move through the ranks, I do believe there's a level or an element of some fighters who will never get through the ranks. Some kids will never be open class, and some open class fighters will never be ready for professional success. That there are limits on us all. We all get equal opportunities, but some of us are more naturally gifted.
Can you be really specific about why you think a kid wouldn't be able to progress, let's say, into open class from being a novice?
Well, I think if we go in before the novice stage, it's the eligibility to box. I think that's like the most important thing.
Yeah.
Now, there's two, for me, there are two real criteria as what would allow someone to box. Apart from the fact that they're medically fit, of course, that's a given. So the first criteria is dexterity. Some people just have better balance and coordination and dexterity, and you have to teach the moves. But the phrase 2 left feet, whilst it's quite cruel, that can apply. Whilst we had the Johnny Nelson, who we mentioned earlier, the exception who didn't have really much boxing ability, he must have had some level of dexterity. I've had so many beginners over my amateur career and just doing boxing classes that some people never get it. I'm an artist, I'm an illustrator, that's my background. And you can get better at drawing, but you can't one day decide I'm going to be an illustrator for a career. And just, you have to have an element of that. You know, you have to have an element of ability and skill. We can improve on that. We can build on that, but you do have to have an element of ability and skill. The second thing, before we move on to, you know, even becoming carded as an amateur boxer, was the one thing that Mark Tate always said to me. Now, when I first had a competitive spar, for example, I'd been in the gym a couple of weeks. I hadn't really been knocked about. I'd been sparring from day one, but the other more carded lads were not hitting me. They were just moving around with me. And I had a little bit of skill, to be honest, quite early on, because I'd watched it and I'd studied it and I understood it. And I was a boxing fan before I became a boxer at 15 years old.
Right.
But when I sparred with someone called Jonathan Lane. Now, Jonathan Lane, he was a Yorkshire champion. He was a lighter kid than me. I think he was a featherweight at the time. He was a year below me at school. And because I wasn't going crazy, but because I was quite advanced early on, Mark Tate said to Johnny, he says, you're going to have to give Julian a few shots back. You're going to have to just,
work
get to learn, because this kid looks good. And I'm probably labouring the point. Johnny Lane hit me with a solid jab. He was a really strong, hard-punching kid. He hit me with a solid jab straight on the nose. I got that little black shake. It's called that black space. I got the black shake, and within about half a second, he buzzed me, and I tried to hit him again. And then I stepped in again, and then he hit me again. I saw the stars. I saw the black space, and I was trying to land on him, and my eyes were watering. And Mark Tate called time. And I was a little bit frustrated. And I said, oh, God, that was rubbish. And Mark Tate says, you'll box. And I was a bit defeated. And I said, what do you mean I'll box? And he says, there's only ever two reactions when you get hit. There's the reaction from 99% of the public, which is why 99% of people would never be able to box or fight combat sports. There's a reaction when you get hit to turn away. Now, that's your natural reaction. That's your instinct. And then there's the other reaction when you get hit, you get annoyed, or you get the red mist, or you want to pay back the favour. There's only ever two types. Now, the ones who fit into the 99% who react, turn away, you'll always do that. You'll never, ever become an amateur boxer. That sounds harsh, because your natural reaction is flight, not fight. If your natural reaction is to fight, and you can mentally deal with that, and you've got the dexterity, it takes you on to what I would call the platform of, we can do something with you. Now, that sounds quite harsh. People think we can get used to getting hit. You can't. Your natural reaction, your nature is your nature. And if you think of, so you're involved in boxing, Kevin, I'm involved in boxing stroke, mixed martial arts. How many times have people said to you, and there'll be hundreds of people, how can you do that? How can people do that? I don't know how you can get into a ring. What they're actually saying is, I don't know how you can deal with getting hit in the face. And that's the first step with being a boxer.
It's not normal. We've got to get that right.
I mean, if you think of, I'm going to go off on one, and I'll be very quick with this one. If you think of the film with Brad Pitt and Ed Norton, Fight Club.
Yeah.
There's a part in that film which I love, which is, is where Tyler Durden's saying to his students, the kind of these, this crazy bunch of guys, and he's saying to them, go into the street, they're like disciples of his, go into the street and start a fight. That's a homework assignment. He gives them this crazy assignment to start a fight. And they're going up to people and they're hitting them at the back of the head and spraying water on them and doing all these different kind of things. And most people won't fight. Some people do. Most people turn away and not fight. They'll do anything to avoid having a fight. I know lots of people in my own personal life will say, I could never, ever fight. So that has to be something that's innate. It's in you. Can I deal with getting hit in the face?
Yeah.
So if I have dexterity, it doesn't have to be great. I can work with that. If I have someone whose natural instinct is to be able to fight back and not run, not turn away, I can work with that. And then that takes you on to the basic things. What am I looking for a novice boxer? Well, there's certain things you look for when they're sparring, when they're training. You get to a certain level of fitness. You get to a certain when they can do 4-2s or 5-2s sparring and be able to hold themselves. And then you instinctively know as a coach when they're ticking certain boxes, like with your son when he had his debut, is he ready? We had a similar situation with my son's MMA debut yesterday. It was a longer path because you have to learn more disciplines, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, etc. But his coach and I knew that he was ready to fight, and he proved to be competitive. But then, to your point, you become a novice amateur boxer, you get a little bit more seasoned. You might have your first season, you might be having mixed results, you might win all those fights, and then you make a decision as a coach. Do I put my fighter after 1 or 2 seasons into the developments? And you don't put everybody in because you know some might not be ready at that stage, you know, the under 10 developments or the under 20 developments. Some might be ready at that stage and some might not be.
Yeah.
So you're looking for certain things that boxer A, who's 6-1, and boxer B, who's 4-2. Which of those 2 kids am I going to put in the developments and take to the next natural level? I'd be looking for, well, first of all, you're looking for the commitment and the desire, because we've assumed now they can both fight.
Yeah.
They can deal with the pressure, the novice, of course, but what's going to get them to the developments and what's going to get them to be competitive and what's going to get them to compete? So the fitness obviously is a part of that, but you're also looking for them to do certain things that boxer A might not be able to do, that boxer B can do. And one of those things obviously is dealing with pressure. You're not always throwing shots. You might be in shape, and there are times when you get buzzed and there are times when you get hurt, and you're looking for someone who's got composure.
Yeah.
Now, composure can be something that's a personality trait, but composure is something obviously that you learn by being under pressure. But we talked about adversity earlier on. You learn that by adversity. And then you make a decision on which of those 2 kids are going to be ready for the development. But obviously there's lots of levels, as we've talked about. So there's a non-boxer level to the novice boxer level to the development B, development A, and then you look at the CYPs, etc. What I always think, and this is just my own opinion, is boxers who progress through the ranks, of course, they generally have more ability, than the kids who don't. They have more commitment and more dedication. Those are things that are a given, really.
Yeah.
But for me, the better you get, the less wastage you do. Whenever I see a really, really good fighter, so if you look at a 2-bout amateur, I'm not saying they flail, there'll be elements of skill, but there's so much wastage in what they do. They waste the punches, they waste the space in the ring, they use all that space, all the energy, they're slipping and rolling without even being in range. And the other thing that they don't do is they don't pace themselves. You very rarely see a 1 or 2-bout amateur. They start the tank at 100.
Yeah.
They empty 50% of the tank in the first round.
Yeah.
They empty, 40% of the tank in the second round. The third round, they're just exhausted and they're just swinging. You see this all the time, don't you? And seasoned boxers and boxers with composure, like I mentioned earlier about being able to navigate tough times and being able to just use time to kill the clock and time to smother and when to hit and when not to hit. That comes from composure. It comes from being seasoned. But as I've said, it's always the fighter who wastes less. I think that progresses through the ranks. So composure, less wastage, shortening the punches inside.
Yeah.
Shortening the distance between each fighter, only slipping and only blocking when you need to, as opposed to just being like this Duracell bunny and just flailing and flailing and flailing. And whenever you think of the best amateurs, whilst it might be at a really high pace, they don't waste lots.
Yeah.
They're very punch efficient, basically.
Yeah.
So I look for many, many things. I've worked with fighters from first amateur fight. I took Gary Sykes to his first amateur fight. We knew he was going to be special, by the way.
Yeah.
And lads who just club show boxers, to kids who won the junior ABAs, kids who won the developments, and kids who won the ABAs. And you just see different things from them all. But it's a long-winded answer. As a coach, what am I looking for? Some of it I'm looking for certain metrics, but some of it is instinctive. You will look at a certain fighter and you'll say, he's going to be all right in the ABAs. He might not be his season when he wins it, but he's got the right composure. He's fit, he's strong, he's seasoned enough. I think he'll do well and he'll perform. Because that's always what you're looking for. You're looking for him to perform.
Yeah, you're looking for them to perform. Yeah, I mean, results are results, but belonging there and looking like they have, all of those attributes. Yeah, it's a great answer. So just final point on this one before I move on to another question. Amateur to pro, What are you, in an ideal world, no, if you think back to your journey with Gary Sykes, but also with many other great amateur and great professional boxers, what would you do now, knowing what you know now with the benefit of hindsight, in the last year or two of an amateur's career as they prepare to turn over as a pro? They might still be trying to achieve national titles. They might still be trying to achieve things on the international stage. But what are you thinking of, and what are you starting to adapt to help them prepare for that journey?
One of the key things I would be doing, and I know it's frowned upon, and Ricky Hatton was a good example of this. Ricky Hatton, when he got towards the last 2-3 years of his amateur career, was sparring and training with professionals.
Yeah.
I think culturally that's something there are mixed views on it because people don't like it. But when you start to train with professionals, I talk about wastage, you notice that the best professionals, even the ones who are movers, not everybody's an inside or a mid-range fighter, even the move, they tend to waste less. And I think by being around that culture and sparring with professionals, you get to see that punch economy, that output, and everything's economical with professional, whether it's a 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 rounder, they're always more economical. Whereas I've seen amateurs, and when I started taking Gary Sykes, for example, because he'd never sparred with pros, he just had one bad spar with Carl Johansson. I started working with him after his second professional fight at his request. And I'll give you a little story, actually. It gives you an example of why I think they should start training alongside and sparring with professionals. So I'd been working with Gary for he had a bad spar with Carl Johansson I think he just finished amateur, or he just turned pro. He'd had a bad spar with Carl and it didn't end well, and he didn't get through the 4 rounds. I'll just say that. Now, this was an ABA champion. This was a kid who most people wanted his signature. He was an elite fighter, an England international, and he didn't do well with Johansson. And he was telling me about the spar, and I thought, you've probably emptied the tank in the first. We talked about the novices, but you probably emptied the tank in the first 2 rounds. So I started getting him seasoned sparring, and I remember one night over in Huddersfield, Jason Booth came over. Jason Booth was a crafty as hell. I think he was super bantamweight at the time. Sykes had just had two pro fights. He hadn't been boxing for a while. They had a year's gap in his career early on. I won't go into the details. And I took him to spar Jason Booth. And I was saying, take your time, work with him. If Jason Booth throws 20 punches in the first round, throw 20 punches. Throw 21. Don't do what Sykes does and don't throw 100. Well, he emptied the tank in 2 rounds, didn't he? He couldn't really miss Jason Booth, or he thought he couldn't miss him. He had loads of success with him. And after 3 rounds, he could barely breathe. And he says, Jules, I'm not going to get through. How many are we doing? 6. I says, you're doing 8. They've come over all the way from you're doing 8, mate. And that was probably the best lesson that Gary ever had. Even though he was a phenomenal fighter who had a great work rate, it didn't come by accident. It came over years and years of developing that and doing certain things in his training. And he emptied the tank. Had Gary Sykes been sparring with professionals towards the end of his amateur career, maybe the last 1 or 2 years, he would have started to learn to pace himself when he needed to, instead of just throwing everything for 3 rounds. So I think training with professional boxers, not all the time, but sometimes, I think that's crucial. I think picking up tips from professional coaches is also crucial as well. And I just think it's a real key part of the development. So with Sykes, we had many nights like that where he would spar elite pros. He'd empty the tank, and he'll learn, even though he had a high work rate, he would learn to navigate those tough periods.
Yeah.
And that's something that novice fighters tend not to do. When they're tired, they're surviving. Whereas when you're seasoned and you learn how to navigate those tough periods, you're not surviving. You're just taking time out of the rounds to kill the clock and to spoil. And you learn that from professionals. There might be some amateurs who are good spoilers. I'm not aware of them because it's not within the rules, is it? It's
No,
holding work side. It's not within the rules.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is very timely because we're recording this the day after Pat McCormack found out is absolutely the wrong way to describe it, by the way, because he's gone 12 rounds with a very seasoned, experienced, improving fighter in Conor Walker. But it has sparked this debate. A number of people in the sport talking about, does amateur experience really stack up, and does it really make a difference? Is it really as important as some people think it is? But B, why are we not producing? Why are these amateur stars not kicking on in the pro ranks? What are the coaches doing? What are the trainers doing? What are the amateur coaches doing before they even become professionals?
Mhm.
For what it's worth, I actually think last night will do Pat McCormack the world of good, as long as his attitude and commitment and application to the sport remains or is where it needs to be. Because you should only, I mean, ninth, 10th fight, whatever it is, as a professional. No, it used to be 20 to learn, 20 to earn, right? And maybe his GB career did put him ahead of that schedule, but it didn't put him that far ahead, clearly, because we saw that last night. And he came up only just short against a very, very good fighter, Conor Walker, who is fringe world level. I don't think anyone can deny that. He might not be a world champion. He might never be a world
He's a
champion,
good fighter.
but he is a good fighter, right? So, with that in mind, you look back on this conversation and you think, what are the little things that could be added in? And it's not that we're here to tell Rob McCracken what to do, or we're here to tell Ben Davison, Lee Wiley and Barry Smith what to do, but there's questions to be answered.
I have very strong views on this. It's something I've talked about previously before online, and this doesn't make me a know-all, and it doesn't mean to say that I'm advocating myself. One of my sayings, and anyone who knows me, the fighters and the coaches who I've, I always speak often. Well, not anymore, but I used to talk to Tony Borg and Billy Nelson, used to chat to all the time. But certainly other coaches, and Steve Mailer and I are good friends still, and like I said, we're passionate boxing people. I don't believe there's good enough coaching in the UK at professional level, elite level, who teach fighters how to work inside. Now, I have a saying, I've always had this saying: if you can't defend inside, you can't fight inside. Now, that is a key part of boxing. Now, I'll explain. So, some fighters naturally can just fight up close. That's just naturally what they can do. But what we see is a conveyor belt of massively talented amateurs who cross over, who have got fantastic boxing skills, great range, great discipline. But I was just talking then about killing the clock, as mentioned earlier. So it's an interesting point about killing the clock. Now, I study inside fighting. And I'm having to study even more now because of obviously the mixed martial arts, but I study inside fighting, but I always have. Now, I went back, we just remember talking about Donald Curry and Colin Jones, and I says Donald Curry was a fantastic inside fighter and he was incredibly good defensively, but could fight in the pocket. Now, when I saw the McCormack fight, I had to watch it this morning. That was a fighter for me who couldn't defend inside. You don't have to be an inside fighter. You have to be able to contain your opponent when it matters in the pocket.
Yeah.
I watch boxing every single night. I watch fighters who can work inside. I watch all different styles, but I've always loved the Mike McCallums, the Donald Currys, the Ezzard Charleses, the guys who can fight in the pocket, who are relaxed and comfortable in the pocket. I've been watching lots of training videos recently of Eddie Chambers, the former heavyweight, and I'm watching his coaching. And I don't know if anybody's shouting about Eddie Chambers as a coach. The subtleties that he's showing are absolutely brilliant. Some of the best things I've found online in quite a while.
He does a podcast. He does a podcast, doesn't he? I can't remember the name.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
He's actually,
if he does, I'll listen to that.
Yeah, he's a guest on a podcast. God, I can't remember the name of the podcast, but no. Anyway, it'll come to me. But he's a guest. He's a regular guest as a sort of co-host on a podcast, and that's the first time I really came across him, to tell you the truth. So
He's talking about inside fighting all the time. I'll give you an example. So Audley Harrison was always going to be a successful amateur. He was an exponent of the amateur style at the time. Head guards, point scoring, 4-2.
Yeah.
It was perfect for him. Now, how does Audley Harrison, Olympic gold medalist, how does he get beat by Martin Rogan? Average at best, heavyweight. How does that happen? So who's teaching Audley Harrison how to work inside, how to smother, how to tie up, and how to work inside? Now, great boxers, they're really truly great boxers, can always work at different ranges or neutralize fighters at different ranges. So, there's There's the outside, there's the mid-range, and then there's fighting in the pocket or being able to defend in the pocket. You have to be able to fight at all those three ranges. Now, I'll give you a good example. I saw Josh Kelly lose to David Avnesian. Absolutely zero inside game.
Another fight has been referenced on a similar topic.
Well, I've not seen that because I'm still coming down from yesterday's high.
Yeah,
Now, I remember watching Josh Kelly. 2 rounds, pinging David Avnesian. Avnesian's getting close. And Josh Kelly starts to hyperventilate and panic. Why? Why is he not comfortable when a guy's up close against him? Why can't he just rest the head on his left shoulder? Just turn the shoulders, smother, roll, pivot, James Toney style. Comfortable inside, get the shot off, or at least neutralize it. Now, I've said this before, and I truly believe there's a lack of good coaches at the top level of fighters who can work inside. Anthony Joshua, when you saw Andy Ruiz, I'm talking about before the 3rd round, there was a moment in the 2nd round where Andy Ruiz, it was a brilliant amateur himself, he had a really good amateur record. Now, Anthony Joshua is letting his shots go, and Andy Ruiz starts parrying the jab. He doesn't move off, he doesn't step back, he parries the jab and he slips. And you can see AJ thinking, this guy's got ring craft. This guy's got some serious ring craft. And he starts to breathe and he's parrying and sliding and slipping. Everything that AJ is doing, of course, he gets dropped. But how would you get to be the heavyweight champion of the world when you can't relax in a ring? And Joshua's done tremendous before anybody says I'm knocking the guy. I'm not. Unbelievable what he achieved. But Anthony Joshua can't fight inside. He fights at mid-range. And if you get inside, he panics, he hyperventilates. But to my point, my line, what I always use, if you can't defend inside, you can't fight inside, and you can't fight. And it's about being able to operate in those 3 arenas. Because if you think of, I'm going to give a very controversial fight now. It's not controversial to me, but the best example I can give you about the 3 ranges of boxing is Sugar Ray Leonard against Marvin Hagler. 2 phenomenal fighters.
Yeah.
Ray Leonard used his legs and his feet for the first 4 rounds, but you can't move forever.
No.
But when the fight started to slow down in the 5th round and Hagler started to catch up with Leonard didn't go to pieces. Leonard, from round 5 and 6, was able to defend in the pocket. He was able to counter in the pocket.
Yeah.
And to some extent, he contained Hagler. Irrespective of who you thought won that fight. And then when it gets to round 8 and 9, Leonard has to fight his way out of that corner. Because Hagler, the legs will only take you so far. The long shots, the fast shots will only take you so far. Once you start to tire, if you box on the outside, once you start to tire, your footpath, your footfall starts to reduce. And once that footfall starts to reduce, you have to be comfortable in range. You have to be comfortable with somebody close to you. And then what happens then when fighters get tired? Generally 9 times out of 10, unless it's Floyd Mayweather, you're in the pocket. And Pat McCormack couldn't defend up close.
Yeah.
That's not an attack on him. Phenomenal skills. But why haven't they been working on that in the gym? Why is he panicking, almost getting caught with silly shots at mid to close range? Where's his up close defense? Where's his inside work? Why is he not comfortable when someone's pressing it? To sit with him for a minute. Where's the skills of an Ezzard Charles or an Archie Moore? Why are coaches... Everybody's coaching the outside game, the flash game, the fast game. Where are the Eddie Chambers of this world, who I've just discovered as a coach, teaching this stuff? Yeah. It's like, it's natural for more aggressive fighters to be able to fight inside. Like Bam Bam Rodriguez, love that guy. Oh. He can fight mid-range, he can fight in the pocket, he can box on the outside. Yeah, Crawford can fight inside. The way he was countering was beautiful.
Absolutely. How comfortable was he? Sat right in front of Canelo. So, where other fighters have not dared to go, and he sat right in front of him, as relaxed, breathing, as you say, and it's just the way he slipped and the way he manipulated him in those moments, and actually ended up making, being the force that was pressing, that was putting the pressure on.
And I think it's a neglected part of boxing. I think, Ennis does it. He can do it at all the different ranges. In the UK, it's a neglected part of boxing. I'm going to have to catch up with some of the debate because, as I say, I have strong views on it.
Yeah.
And I have seen really, really talented amateurs And I've watched it, and you almost become, becomes a prophecy. And I've been watching with my partner or my sons, and I've said, he's going to go to pieces. You hear the Sky commentary saying he's boxing fantastic, he's putting on a clinic, and I'm thinking 4 or 5 rounds when he starts to slow down, he's going to go to pieces. He's going to come undone.
Yeah, no, there's an inevitability about it. And never have I seen a fight where that's in evidence more than Navanesian and Kelly. What a,
He just panicked, didn't he? He just couldn't. It's all right having the low left hand and the flash style and the twitch muscle style and being flashed from a comfortable position. Guy gets on your chest and you start hyperventilating after 3 rounds. And yeah, that level of preparation, that was embarrassing.
Well, it was. But the flip side to it is, like I say, with Pat McCormack, he's been there now. They should be sat there as soon as he's ready to sit down and analyse that fight with the team. Where did he go wrong? Where are the things we need to work on? What did Conor Walker do that had success against us in those moments that really turned the fight? And then we're going to go to work on it. And okay, they should have done it earlier, probably. I mean, maybe they have been, and he's just not there yet. Maybe he needs to literally walk a few miles in Conor Walker's shoes to understand the real context of it. It's okay doing it in sparring. It's okay doing it when the lights aren't on. But maybe it was a good thing for him. But your point is really noted.
And he's a phenomenal boxer. And I think Barry Smith and Ben Davison are good coaches. I really do. I'm just saying, generally, it's not something that's, having been in many, many, many gyms in the UK, whether it's for sparring or as a coach, it's not generally taught. The inside game, the ring craft and the art of inside boxing on a dime. I always have the lads sparring on a dime, working on a dime. That it's not taught. And if it's not taught, you suddenly can't learn it in the middle of a fight. And you have to throw twice as many punches, twice as hard to keep the guy off you. And you're picking up damage all the way through the fight. So
absolutely. And if you look at, let's say,
it's tough to watch.
Yeah, definitely. If you look at Pat McCormack, you look at Ben Whittaker, you look at Hamza Shiraz, there is a cohort of very, very talented boxers who could go on to be great British boxers, multiple weight world champions, literally take over the world, but only if they can fill the gaps that.
Absolutely.
And you look at maybe what Bosie Ennis has done with John Ennis and think, I understand why Jack Catterall's gone there. We can talk about American US fighters, trainers and English boxers. That's another subject. But you look at what he's done with him and you think, goodness me, all this talent that we've got that's coming through a great GB program, it's coming through great platforms, lots of money linked to Matchroom Queensbury. The amount of money in British boxing at the moment is phenomenal. But, a little bit less Instagram and a little bit more inside fighting and they might get a bit quicker.
Absolutely, because fights at some point, whether it's that actual fight or at some point in your career, you're going to end up in the trenches. You can't just move. I mean, I think we saw a really good example of that. One of my favourite fights, actually, I watched it last week again. One of my favourite recent fights was Bam Bam Rodriguez and Sonny Edwards. Now, Sonny Edwards is a phenomenal boxer. He didn't move like I expected him to move, but he effectively got hunted down. And then the damage what he was picking up all through those 10 rounds. And it was just basically it was a guy who was a phenomenal boxer and counterpuncher against Rodriguez, who's a great inside fighter. He's a great pressure fighter. He's great at range, and he's great when he wants to take time out and pivot and to just, use his ring craft. So it's about being rounded. It's about, you're always going to have a natural inclination to box a certain way. Your son will be the same. He'll have a natural inclination to box a certain way. But at least you have to be able to, when you're not at that range or that kind of arena where you're comfortable, you have to be at least able to neutralize and defend in that spot. If not, have an output. It's about neutralizing. And we saw Floyd was the king, wasn't he? When Maidana pinned him early on and he was just swinging those massive shots. No one ever looked as comfortable, against the ropes in the corner as Floyd Mayweather. Nobody. And he picked up very, very few things. And Floyd didn't learn that in his later career because he was moving up to welterweight and light middleweight. Floyd learned that in the gyms as a young fighter, as a young amateur, because he practices the art and the craft. And it's about, that was always my teaching philosophy in boxing. I'm not going to work on what you're good at. We'll keep polishing that because you're already good at it.
Yeah.
But it's where you've got the gaps. Let's work on the gaps because
Yeah.
that makes you a more rounded fighter. And I think that's people over polish the stuff they're good at, and less so.
That's an interesting point, and I defer to your opinion on it in terms of experience. In other sports, talk about super strengths. Let's say a left-footed footballer. Sometimes a fantastic left-footed footballer doesn't need someone to be working on their weakness on their right foot because their left foot is so good. Messi, the prime example, but a lot of the great left-footed footballers over the years, Chris Waddle, for example, unbelievable. Could make players fall over and just being so comfortable, but his one foot was significantly stronger than the other. And I've always felt that in some ways should apply to every sport, but I think this conversation will make me think again a little bit, to be honest with you.
It's just the way I am. It's the way I work, in my profession, in management. It's like, I know what I'm strong at, and there are other areas where I think I still need development, age 54 years old, and I try and address those areas because the other stuff, I'm not saying it comes natural, I'm saying it comes easier than some of the more difficult things.
I mean, when I look at it from a father and an influence on a boxer, I've said right from the start, you need to be able to do everything. I mean, won't be able to do everything, but you need to be able to push towards being able to do everything and close the gaps that are big gaps.
Well, the best example I could give, and I'll finish this one quickly because I understand this is a subject I could talk forever about.
The same.
The best example is when I always talk to fighters about push-pull. If you're an attacking fighter, it doesn't harm now and again for you to just do a little bit of more movement and defensive boxing. There will come one point in your life as a pressing fighter where the other guy's shorter than you, stronger than you, and he'll push you back. And you might have to learn to box. Equally, if you're a long-range boxer and you rely on reflexes, there'll come a time when you get outboxed, when you've got somebody who's a longer, better, faster, long-range boxer than you, and you might have to go to war. So you need to really get the right early fights and the right sparring, the right development, do the right things in coaching to address those gaps. Am I trying to change your style? No. But do I think it's important that we can fight in all different arenas? Massive.
Plan B, Plan C, anything in life, right? If Plan A doesn't work and you haven't got a Plan B, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and we saw that last night. Again, McCormack, phenomenal fighter. He started at 100, and you could see when it was empty, and when it was emptying, he had after 7-8 rounds, you thought, he's going to get to him. Walker's going to get to him because he's not able to neutralise what he's doing. He's just able to keep him off by being competitive, but not by messing him around and spoiling, and it was inevitable.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Parent coaches, Joe Calzaghe, Enzo Calzaghe, Julian McGowan, Joe McGowan. We're going to go, we could go through quite a list, couldn't we? What do you think? You've been both, right? You've been a parent coach to some extent, or admittedly relatively inexperienced on that journey, I suppose, but definitely feeling a lot of those emotions right now. And you've also been a very, very successful non-parent coach. What's the difference between the two, and how would you articulate that, and what could you learn if you were a non-parent coach from a parent coach?
It's like anything, I like to break things down, as you can probably tell by now. Now, some parent coaches relationships work and some don't. Now, I think it probably sounds quite philosophical, but it depends on the relationship before that child develops an aptitude for a certain sport. If we say boxing, that's what we're here talking about. Now, you can have a domineering father who's, egotistical, wanting to live his dreams through his son. And to some extent, and we hear this all the time, domineering fathers say, my son will be a world champion. I'm not worried about his emotional development. I'm not worried about if he's happy. I'm not worried about this. You will be a success. So it depends on the relationship for me. Whereas you can have a really great relationship with your child, and then he develops an aptitude. And as long as you're a competent coach, to some extent, the relationship can work. So I always think, first of all, it depends on the relationship before the sport. because you hear about these really domineering fathers, don't you? And after a while, it becomes very, very unhealthy. And these things come out. Certainly when the boxer becomes more famous, the cracks start to appear. So the relationship is key.
Go back to Roy Jones Jr. and his father there as an example, right?
Exactly. You know, you hear about these parents, don't you, who stand over the son and say, right, the sons are waking up, they're getting out of bed, they're going 100 press ups, do this, do that. And there is one, I'm not going to mention the name because I think you have to be respectful, but there is one parent and child relationship that I became aware of, and I heard some really not very nice things. And that boxer was quite well known. I saw a few things firsthand, and that boxer retired unbeaten, never boxed again, never won anything, never boxed again. And certain things came out about the relationship again. He was a very, very domineering father. And I once saw something, and by the way, it's not anyone I know personally, it's someone I've been in the gym with twice.
Yeah.
And that child who became an adult was a man, was a man boy. It was completely unhealthy. And then you get others and it just works.
Yeah.
I think if you want what's best for your child, I mean this sincerely. So my son had a great debut last night. If he said to me, Dad, I don't ever want to fight again, great. What do you want to do, son? I'll back you. Anything you want to do.
Yep.
Because he chooses to fight and he chooses to want to fight again. My experience, albeit as a boxing coach, I can work on his hands. I can work on his strength, nutrition, all that stuff I've been very heavily involved in. The mixed martial arts side of things, that's his coach. Yep, that's his coach. There'd be other areas where fathers will suddenly start to be the know-all when it comes to mixed martial arts and get heavily involved. It's a difficult one. I'm not answering black and white, Kevin. The reason I'm not doing it is because it really depends on the relationship with the child, whether it's a healthy one or not. The bond and the love between Calzaghe Senior and Junior was there to see. It was a dynamic that worked. Enzo and his father, he will have pushed him hard, but he will have known how to push his son. He'll have known when to push him and when not to push him. But ultimately, I have no doubts at any point, if Joe Calzaghe would have turned around to Enzo and said, Dad, I don't want to box again, he would have supported him. He'd have said, absolutely, son, what do you want to do? And that's part of it. You get fathers who are living they're living their lives through their sons. I mean, I heard that, is it Ryan Garcia who's gone through his own challenges? I've heard Ryan Garcia's dad now is going to be like his main coach.
Really?
Heard something about that. I don't know how true it is. You pick up, Ryan Garcia is a very confused young man, phenomenal talent, and it's not really showing at the moment. I think he's got his own issues, but there's lots of clips of him working with his dad, and his dad can barely hold a pair of pads. I'm not saying pads are everything, by the way, but his dad can barely hold a pair of pads, and listen to his dad talk. He clearly doesn't know boxing. So that's an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah.
He's clearly an unhealthy relationship. And then you've got others, whereas the ones I know personally, which is Sean O'Hagan and Josh Warrington, was very successful.
Yeah.
It was with each other from day one, and look at what they've gone on to achieve. So that relationship worked. It worked.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I look at Bill Haney and Devin Haney, and I see some of the worst things that I think could come out of a father-son relationship, but also some of the best as well. And it's a real melting pot, that one, that I can't quite get my head around if it's been good or not. I suppose I would come down on the side of it has done because of his achievements in the sport at still a relatively young age, but there's a lot of noise with it as well, right?
There certainly is, and the dad becomes. One of the things is I'm not big on, you can be a non-boxer and you can be a boxing coach. If you're a coach, is a very different mindset and a very different set of skills, what are transferable to, to other things. And I think you can be a coach at one thing and go across to the other, as long as you surround yourself with other good people.
Yeah.
There'll be elements of, your son, for example, he'll need some key ingredients from other boxing coaches. We also need your involvement as well, because you know your son, you learn yourself on the job, and you can become a really, really good coach, really good boxing coach without having boxed. But then there are people in the sport, and people say, oh, I don't believe that. I know people in the sport who were like really top class boxers. They're not great coaches. They're really not. They just have a name, and all their fighters have got their same homogenized style. It's coaching in itself, like I said, I'm being philosophical, but coaching in itself has got many areas to it. But my belief is if you truly have the best interests of your child at heart and you want the best for them and you know they're passionate about sport, you're probably the best coach for them. Just surround yourself with other good people
Yeah,
who
yeah.
can help out until you can kind of, get even more and more and more involved. And Sean O'Hagan, he'd been around boxing, but not massively experienced because he'd just with his son.
Well, yeah.
And he's become a very rounded coach, and him and his son grew together on the journey, and that made sense. And Sean was always smart. He always surrounded himself with good people because he loved his son and he did the right thing. And there are people who know Sean. He's quite Marmite, is Sean. I know him very, very well. Success speaks for itself, but there's no falling out between boxer and son, and he's still in the corner. So that's a relationship that has worked. And as I've said, then you get the other relationships which are clearly just don't work. And parents can be a blessing, and parents can be a nightmare in the gyms. Honestly, I've had it myself, whereas one or two particular parents were a nightmare.
Oh, no, no. I mean, I lots of experience in more from football, but some from boxing where, yeah, they're not great for their kids. I think it takes a strong leader in that environment to be able to
You
point
have to be
it out
strong.
and explain that it can't go on like that. And it's an interesting challenge.
It certainly is. But if you have a loving relationship with your dad and you know he has a good level of skill, there's no one knows him better than you, and there's no one knows your son better than you because you have a healthy relationship with your son, and I'm the same. We're very, very close. So his coach James has got a good relationship with my son. They get on really, really well. His MMA knowledge is brilliant. Mine's zero. Mine's zero. But knowing what buttons to push, that's important, and I know that because he's my son.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
And we all work together brilliantly.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, if I just link this to, let's say, teaching inside fighting as an example, goodness me, I mean, I can barely hold a pair of pads. So as you say, it is about getting the right people around
It
who
is.
are able to work to their strengths. So, it's not, if there's gaps in, your son's boxing makeup, then they need to be filled. They need to be filled with people who understand the topic and the subject, have got experience in it, and can in some way connect with your son. And that's it. It's an interesting subject for sure, but one that we're both going to learn a lot more, I think, about in the next few years.
Absolutely. It's a brutal sport, isn't it? All combat sports are, brutal. What I saw last night, I'm coming down now, and it's hard to watch. It's
Yeah,
hard to
it's funny though, isn't it? I think if you have a performance mentality about you as a coach, and I would assume, I can only speak from my experience, but I'm making a big presumption here, but given your experience in the sport and the amount of fighters you've worked with and you've seen up close, and the coaches, the managers, the promoters, everyone in the industry, you must be able to separate yourself from some of the emotions of combat sports
definitely.
in general, because you understand what good practice looks like in that area and what objective opinions will do to improve a situation in another. I've always found it, I can be quite cold because
Yeah, yeah.
these are the objectives. How are we going to get there? And these are the proof points. And if the proof points don't look good, then that's fine. But we address them, and can't keep making the same mistakes. If we're making the same mistakes, and that becomes a problem. But if you keep building and you put that process in place, it's a long process. As long as you understand that commitment's required for a long process, then I can remove myself. As you say, it is tough. And don't get me wrong, there was a moment recently in a fight where there's no doubt about it. My son found himself in deeper water than I think I'd ever seen him, and everyone else in the whole arena knew it as well. And that moment there, I switched from this cold mentality to a concern about his well-being, because he was getting caught up by right hands that he wasn't spotting.
Good.
And it was the punches that he wasn't, like they always say, the punches that you don't see are the ones that do the damage. Everyone could see it in the arena. As it was, he found a way to win. But
Yeah.
when you're in that moment, you do flip between the two.
You do, because you're not in this to make money from your son. I'm not going to make money from my son. No fighter's ever going to make me rich. I don't take any money. I'm like, it's not about money. It's about my children, all four of them, achieving the potential. Doesn't matter whether that's in law or creativity or mixed martial arts. It doesn't matter. It's about achieving the potential. And my role, very much like you, like yourself, if you know that your level of commitment from your son ever drops, that's where you step in. Right. All right. We're going to have a conversation now. Standards, absolute standards.
I'm going to finish on current affairs. What is the one, well, who is the one boxer in world boxing that gets you off your seat or makes you cancel all other plans to make them go watch them? Who is the one that today captures your attention more than anyone else?
It's a great question because my relationship, I mean, I've really ignited my passion for boxing. I spent a lot of years for various reasons and, debates with the British Boxing Board of Control and fighters not really giving me what I needed from them, being disillusioned with the entire sport.
Yeah. But you've
The
been
way
that cycle, right?
the alphabet side of the sport as well, the politics and the multiple belts, which I just hate with a passion.
Yeah.
I became really disillusioned. So I'm starting to pick up in this last 2 or 3 years because, the Riyadh season, the money, what they're pumping into, well, the top level of boxing is giving us the fights we want. I mean, Crawford would be an easy answer, of course, because he's just a gift, isn't he, when we watch him. But for me, and I mentioned him earlier, Bam Bam Rodriguez, I just love watching that guy. I've always, the lighter weight fighters have always been a thing for me.
Yeah.
I remember watching the Sochitaladas and guys like that, and even like, Sanchez and Gomez and Pintor and Zarate and Zamora, all those fighters. I love watching the lighter weight fighters. Watching Bam Bam Rodriguez for me has just been watching a throwback. There's a lot of his fights I haven't seen. It was really, obviously, Chocolata, that fight. But when he fought Sonny Edwards, I was blown away. And I thought, I've met Sonny a few times and I'm good friends with Grant Smith. He was his coach. I know Grant Smith really well. I haven't spoke for a while because you get out the loop. I'm no longer on the circuit, but Grant and I were friends. But I always thought Bam Bam would beat him. I thought it's going to be a great fight, but Rodriguez will beat him.
Yep.
And I can't get that fight out of my head. It was like one of the best things I've seen for so long.
And that's a big,
what a fighter.
That's a big compliment to Sonny Edwards as well. I think a lot of people,
Brilliant.
Very, very quick to throw Sonny Edwards' career and his capabilities on the scrap heap. I think it'll age well. Let's put it that way.
He's definitely a Hall of Famer. Is Bam Bam. He's an all-time great. He's phenomenal. And Sonny Edwards, I think you're right. That'll age well.
And I thought it was a very, very good fight. It did kind of remind me a little bit of maybe a Bellew Usyk type situation where you've got six.
It was always coming.
Yeah, it was coming. You have 6 or 7 very competitive rounds. On the face of it, to similar level operators, but always knowing that one of them had another gear, and maybe a couple. And I think with Bam, I have this funny feeling that he could step up because of his footwork and his mastery of the sweet science and of movement and where to position yourself rather than power. I think he will cause a lot of problems to Inouye if they can ever somehow meet in the middle. And for me, it feels like it's just too far to have that conversation. So I almost feel bad saying, but I do think he's that special. Like I say, particularly at the fundamentals, particularly on the way that he shifts around the side is as poetry, emotion as you'll get in terms of boxing footwork.
It's beautiful. He's like a less flash Penel Whitaker. I mean, Whitaker was a slightly different style to Rodriguez. I'm aware of that, but the way I used to study Whitaker, how he used to just pivot off to his right, that southpaw stance and get on the left side.
There was always a kind of showman about it, though, wasn't there? Whereas there's no
always, yeah.
And this is back to a point you made earlier in the pod, that it's the simplicity and not wasting anything, and that is him all over, right? He doesn't waste any move.
It's just inches. All sport ever comes down to is inches, isn't it? That's all it ever comes down to, and it's he makes it look easy. I mean, his most recent fight, that was against a decent operator. He made him look like a club fighter. He looked like nothing. It was like, this was the easiest thing he's ever done. And the way he closed the show with the little shoulder dip, textbook left cross, it was wow, And like I say, I've seen the Sonny Edwards fight several times now. Now, anyone will tell you who knows me intimately, I don't watch fights more than once now, not like I used to. I watch boxing every night. but I watch them on loop. I watch fighters train. I watch great fights all the time. There's a channel called Vintage Boxing, which was really good quality uploads from
Yeah.
the 70s and 80s, but the UK versions, and I'm addicted to that channel. It's like,
So, your Mark Kaylors and Tony Simpsons and those types.
you'll just start me off. You'll never get me off. And I'm watching that stuff all the time. And there's something about Bam Bam. He's cut from that cloth, and I can just watch the way he moves, and I just love him. And I think if you talk to me so humble, we see him when he's in his geeky clothes and his glasses. He just looks like a gamer. He just looks like a kid, like a high school kid.
But there's something almost Eastern European, because I like, you look at Usyk, you look at Golovkin, look at how simple a life they lead, how family orientated they are, how dismissive they are of material showbiz type culture, and how they and yet how they can all be very presentable in that context, because they're still they're still so desirable as a product that of course they're all over Instagram or what have you, but that, like you say, just choir boys, really, but choir boys with
Killers.
this incredible killer capability in the boxing ring.
Just watching the things that he does, I always reference certain fighters and certain moves when I'm coaching. I have to be careful coaching boxing for MMA fighters because there's different disciplines, but I'll reference certain fighters and then I'll reference certain moves. And there's certain things that Bam Bam does with his feet. I'll just say, I can't show you that. Just go watch the tapes, because what am I going to do? I'm just going to trip up. And he defies gravity. His balance, his positioning is just superb. He's always comfortable. I referenced earlier about inside fighters. He's always comfortable. He never panics. He gets caught with a good shot. He resets. Sonny Edwards landed some brilliant shots in that fight. It was very competitive in some of those rounds.
What he's poker
And he
faced.
just, poker faced, resets, takes a half step back, spins off, back on the jab, and then goes again. And he's just a consummate professional, a bit like Usyk. Usyk is great at resetting. He resets all the time. He has a moment, he resets. And then the hallmark of legendary fighters is they have gears, don't they? They just go up a gear and another gear until you can't compete. He did that, when a round starts to get close, like Sonny Edwards, he was beating Edwards up, but then in the middle of rounds, Edwards come back a little bit, and then he found another gear, and then he found another gear. And that's a quality fighter.
No, I'm with what he's going to. It's going to be a legendary career without a doubt, and we're lucky to be living in a time when we get to watch plenty of him. So yeah, okay, Julian, this has been. I think this will be the longest pod that I've done. I haven't actually covered all the things I wanted to cover. The detail, your cerebral kind of approach to boxing, I think is phenomenal. It really does occur to me that you would make an incredible pundit to break down the sport for media outlets. I really feel that very, very strongly. It's been an absolute pleasure, a privilege for me to, without wanting to sound like Steve Blunt, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to talk boxing with you for nearly 2 hours. And I'm pretty sure we can do it a lot longer, and we may well do it again at some stage if you're willing. But thank you for coming on the show. Congratulations on achieving so much in the sport in a very understated way as well, might I add, in terms of, really humble guy, really, back to maybe a little bit what I just said about the Eastern Bloc fighters who, without too much fanfare, go about and make a big impact in the sport. And that's clearly what you've done. I want to say a shout out, thank you to Bob on Canada's Boxing Channel, because without Bob, I wouldn't really know that much about you, to be honest, Julian. And that was why I reached out to you, or how I reached out to you initially. I'm so glad that I did. And I'm very grateful to him for putting you on a platform where you absolutely belong, because I think you could teach so many people, whether they're boxing fans, young boxers, coaches, anyone involved in the sport. Your thought process is so well explained, and it comes from a place of a huge amount of knowledge. So thank you.
My pleasure. I think it might have been Joe Gallagher, it might have been somebody else who once said to me, "You're the best coach nobody knows." And I never know if that was a compliment or not, but I'll take it.
I'd like to think it was a compliment, for sure. What a pleasure. Thank you so much, Julian. It won't be the last time we speak, but really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. My pleasure, mate. Thanks, Kevin.
Cheers.